We are live.
We are live. I always think of Bill
We're doing it
O'Reilly.
live.
We're
We're
doing
doing
it
it.
live.
You do a
We'll
good
do it
impression.
live. I got to
Who,
stop yelling.
who
But
doesn't remember?
I sometimes watch that video just for amusement because he was so crazy. And then remember, he threw his pen down. And
It
anyway,
was very good. But Katie, I also have to tell you that my ringtone is you introducing me on an Instagram live saying Shannon Watts. That's my ringer. That's my phone ring.
that's so funny. I feel so honored. Thank you, Shannon. So, I'm still trying. First of all, hi everyone who's joining us. I'm still getting the hang of Substack. I've only been on it a couple of weeks. I'm having a
Everyone
lot of
should
fun.
follow you right now.
Sorry.
Everyone should follow you here on Substack.
Oh, thanks, Shannon. Yeah, I mean, gosh, there's so much information, so many smart people out there. It's hard to keep up. Oh, bonjour, Lyon, France. I'm actually going to Paris next week with my daughters. I'm
Oh,
so excited. I'm going to really try hard to stay off social media, but it's very hard for me because I'm addicted, I'm sad to say. And but I think there's so many great people, including you, Shannon, doing important things on social media. It's Julia. Is that my Julia saying I'll believe it when I see it? I think that's Julia from my team. But and I appreciate so many of the smart people who are sharing important information because, like you, and probably like so many people watching, it's so overwhelming. I think that's part of the plan to completely exhaust and overwhelm us.
yep.
And I think it's so critically important, as hard as it is and as stressful as it is and upsetting, to really understand and stay connected to what's happening in the world. And I just want to express my appreciation to you, Shannon, for the great content you produce, and to so many smart people who are helping me understand the world. And as a result, hopefully helping people who follow me understand the world and what's happening.
Can I say something nice back to you now? You
Oh,
know,
no.
yes, yes. You have been, I think, one of the first and foremost journalists and influencers to take news and make it easily digestible and help people learn how to act on that. I mean, you've been doing that ever since I started Moms Demand Action and obviously way before, but on all issues. And I just think my following you on Twitter and on Instagram and now here on Substack, it just makes the world seem less overwhelming.
Well, thank you. I like Dr. Aditi. I know her because we work together on some projects. She's an incredible doctor and writes a lot about stress. But thank you for that. And I think we all miss sometimes being part of a community. I think
Mm,
loneliness, as you know, is such an epidemic, and social isolation. I think that's one of the reasons people get so entrenched in their respective tribes, if you will. And I think having a community, having a place to kind of synthesize and distill everything that's happening and help each other understand it is invaluable. And one of the reasons, among many, because I've known Shannon you all for a long time because I did a documentary on gun violence. And Shannon was one of the key people in that documentary. And I'm going to bring that up in a moment because I thought about you when Eric, what is his last name? Gosh, he's a member of Congress. You guys help me. He's from
Swalwell?
California. Yes. He recently posted a really threatening phone call he got,
Yes.
and it was so scary. And this person was so full of venom and vitriol and bile. And it reminded me so much, Shannon,
Mm,
of the call we recorded. You played some of the calls that you received, especially when you were heading Moms Against Moms Demand.
yep.
And anyway, it made me think of that. But one of the things I'm excited to talk to you about is the question I get asked most frequently on my interviews, or really everywhere, is what can we do?
Mhm.
And I think among everything we're feeling, or amidst everything we're feeling, people feel powerless and they're witnessing things that are happening. And I think that's why so many people appreciate the opportunity to participate in these No Kings rallies
Yep.
and protests that happened last weekend. But that's why I'm excited to talk to you about your book, and everyone needs to check out Shannon's book. I have it right here in front of me. It's called
Oh,
Fired Up.
Katie
How
Couric
to
has my
turn
book in her hands.
Yes, I have your book, How to Turn Your Spark into a Flame and Come Alive at Any Age. I also wanted to talk to you about ageism because,
Mm.
of course, I only remember the mean comments. And, and was doing a Substack interview, and one of the people said to me, "You've had enough time in the spotlight. You should retire." And
Oh.
it made me feel so bad, and then I thought, "Have I? Should I not be doing what I'm doing?" And no, because, I'm ridiculously I'm still pretty sensitive after all these years, and I kept thinking, "Do people not want me here or not
Mm.
appreciate what I'm doing?" And then I was like, "God damn it, how to turn your spark into a flame and come alive at any age, so bite me."
Yeah,
By the way, I blocked that guy, because I was like, "Why
I
are you
love
following
"Bite
me?
Me." "Bite Me" is
Why are you
such an
following
excellent
me
response.
if you feel that way?" It's
Yes.
so baffling. But anyway, so let's get started because there's
Okay.
so much I want to talk to you about. First and foremost, before I talk about kind of what we can all do to use our power at any age, I want to get your reaction to this horrible shooting. Anytime there is a shooting, or certainly a mass shooting, because I've covered so many
Yep.
through the years, um, I think about you, Shannon, and I wonder what you're thinking, and I always want to talk to you. And when this horrible thing happened to this extraordinary woman, clearly, Melissa Hortman and her husband, Mark, when they were killed by this man impersonating a police officer, I guess at close range, when they answered the door and they had these two teenagers, and now they don't have parents. I'm so upset
No,
about it.
it's so, so, so unfathomably horrific, and even more than that, Katie, to your point about trolls, the response by some of our lawmakers, people like Senator Mike Lee, who mocked it, right? I mean, that is a whole new layer of tragedy, and, what's interesting, not interesting, but horrific, is that the same week that this happened, yesterday was 10 years since an armed man pretending to be a parishioner opened fire on 9 Black parishioners in Charleston, North Carolina. Like, this is unfortunately not new. It's not shocking. It is the logical outcome of giving unfettered access to 400 million guns to civilians, in many cases without background checks, without training. This is the unfortunate, tragic, logical outcome of our lax gun laws. And, there was a judge whose son was shot and killed at the door by an armed
I
man
remember
pretending to
that.
be a UPS delivery. Like, this is what is going to happen when you allow dangerous people to have easy access to guns. So I I think it is terrifying to me, not only that it happened, but that too many lawmakers' response was not, "Well, we must strengthen our gun laws. We must prevent this from happening ever again." It was to mock these shooting deaths, and that just takes it to a whole another level of cynicism.
Well, I think the language and the way we speak to one another, especially online behind this cloak
Yes.
of anonymity, has become so coarsened and so vitriolic and really scary. And I think the difference between when I started covering these shootings, I've been doing this a long time. And I remember I went to Columbine after that horrific high school shooting. Of course, I've covered a lot of school shootings, but then just a lot of shootings in general. Is the discourse has further
Yes.
eroded more and more, and I think you're right. I think sometimes as a result, we're focused on toning down the rhetoric instead of making guns harder to access, and I think probably together, they create this incredibly volatile situation, but I'm happy that you bring it back to easy access to guns. the Biden administration tried to do something about that. And have their efforts been reversed, Shannon? Can you tell us sort of the latest on where we are on things like background checks and various like loopholes that exist?
Yep. When I started Moms Demand Action, we kind of thought, okay, Congress will do something. We'll all go back to our normal lives. Obviously, they'll act in the wake of this tragedy. And a few months later, in April of 2013, I was sitting in the Senate gallery in Washington, D.C., and watched as a handful of senators voted this bill down. It was called the Manchin-Toomey Act, a bipartisan bill to close the background check loophole.
Was this after Sandy Hook?
3 months, 4 months.
Yes.
And some of the senators who voted it down were Democrats. And so you have to remember back in 2012, a quarter of all Democrats in Congress had an A rating from the NRA. Today, none do because of our work, but that was the landscape. And so what we realized was that we would need to pivot to doing this work in cities and states and even school boards until we had the right president and the right Congress in place. So we did all that work for a decade. And then finally, after the horrific shootings at Uvalde and in Buffalo, we had the momentum on our side. We had built the foundation that could push lawmakers to do the right thing. So in 2013, as I said, we had Democrats voting against the Manchin-Toomey bill. Heidi Heitkamp, who was the Democratic senator from North Dakota at the time, said the reason she voted against it was she was hearing from her constituents 3-1 against, okay? Flash forward to 2022. Those tragedies happen. We get 15 Republican senators to vote for the bill, for the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first bipartisan federal gun safety legislation to pass in a generation. And one of those U.S. senators, Todd Young in Indiana, very Republican, very conservative, said he voted for it because he was hearing from his constituents 8-1 in favor of it, right? That is a seismic shift in American politics. So that bill that you mentioned passed, it did a whole host of things. It wasn't just background checks, right? Because gun violence deserves holistic solutions. It's not just mass shootings, school shootings, which are about 1% of the gun violence in this country. And so what the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act did was, yes, strengthen background checks, but it also allotted dollars for community violence intervention. It gave money to states to put red flag laws in place. All of these things that have been beneficial. Has Donald Trump rolled back some of those things? Yes, by executive order. Those orders come and go. I think one of the worst things he did was to get rid of, we had finally established an Office of Gun Violence Prevention in the White House that was making a real difference in helping the states coordinate with one another. But I want people to understand this work still goes on in school boards, city councils, and state houses, right? In states like Minnesota, where we never imagined we'd have finally the ability to pass stronger gun laws because there was a supermajority of Republicans. States like Virginia, even Massachusetts. I could go on and on. So that work is still happening. We passed over 500 good gun laws. All of this is cyclical. You have to keep working where you are to create the foundation to act on once you finally have the ability to change.
And I think, this actually goes with your book very well, that if you can work at the state and local level, it's very hard to get movement on the federal level, but a lot can be done, as you have said, and I think as we said in this documentary, to get a
Yes.
state by state, county by county efforts. And that's why I think Mom's Demand has been so successful, because you're focused on that. It's not all splashy and you're not up on Capitol Hill, but you're doing the work day in and day out. And I think that if people want to know what they can do to try to improve situations, is to get involved in Mom's Demand. People say, what can we do? What can we do? And that's one way you can try to improve the situation. And wasn't there another measure that allowed more AK-47s, or what just happened like in the last month, Shannon, where some of these guns could be turned
Yes.
into semi-automatic weapons, and it was against the law, and now it's back and it's okay. Can you help me understand that?
Yes. So after the Vegas shooting, if you recall, a man used a bump stock to shoot out a window and kill an enormous amount of people. And Donald Trump's administration was actually the group that went forward to ban bump stocks. Again, it's a device that can turn a semi-automatic rifle into a machine gun, essentially. That was his administration. And it was enforced by the Biden administration, and then Donald Trump came in and is working to undo that. Thankfully, we have gone ahead and passed bump stock bans in many states across the country.
But what happened to it now? Did it get reversed, you were saying?
He is working to reverse it. The courts are working to reverse it. Donald Trump is working to reverse it through executive order. So it is in limbo right now.
And so that's something that people can call their congressman or senator, congresswoman or senator, and complain about that and say, we don't want that to happen, because that would be a terrible thing. Explain, for people who aren't really super well versed in guns and sort of gun culture, why that's such a dangerous thing to be able to
Mm,
take a bump stock. I think probably some people don't even know what a bump stock is. I'm not very
yep,
knowledgeable about guns either, but can you explain what a
yep.
bump stock does and why this is so dangerous?
Yes. So first, I will say that about 120 people are killed every single day in this country with guns. Hundreds more are wounded, most with handguns, and most in city centers. So I want to make sure we're focusing on the gun violence that is causing the most damage in our country. However, mass shootings are made much more deadly, and they're more common in our country than any other high-income country. Why? Because we give easy access to guns like semi-automatic rifles. So why do we have semi-automatic rifles, the weapons of war among civilians? Because at some point, we sold so many handguns to citizens that the market was saturated, and there's a much higher profit margin on semi-automatic rifles than handguns. So the NRA became very focused on selling semi-automatic rifles to citizens under the auspices of self-defense. And, this was all proven to be, absolute exploitation of what these guns are really meant to do. They're not ever meant to be in the hands of civilians, particularly without background checks, particularly without training, particularly without permitting, right?
And any hunter who uses this is ridiculous.
Yes, people do not hunt generally with AR-15s, right? Unless you're a really bad hunter. But there is a device, it's simply a little piece of plastic or metal that can be used in a semi-automatic rifle that suddenly turns it into a machine gun, which simply means you can fire many more times than you can fire a semi-automatic rifle.
Well,
All you have to
also,
do is
doesn't it
hold.
mean you just hold the trigger and it shoots multiple times?
Yes. And so the reason that semi-automatic rifles sometimes malfunction during a mass shooting tragedy is because they have a flaw in them, a mechanical flaw. So very often there's a mass shooting and people will say they were able to get away because the magazine ran out or because the
That
gun
happened
malfunctioned.
With Gabby
Exactly.
Giffords, right?
Exactly. And so it sounds bizarre, but that's actually a good thing to have a magazine, limit or ban because it protects people in a mass shooting situation. Bump stocks just make them incredibly more dangerous.
One other question, and because I know we want to talk about other things, but I remember when we did this documentary, we said that 74% of NRA members actually favor more
Yes.
sensible gun laws. And it seems to me that the NRA has been significantly weakened with
Mm.
all the corruption of Pierre, wait, what's his name?
LaPierre, Wayne LaPierre.
Wayne LaPierre, sorry, Wayne LaPierre, who was using a lot of money to buy
Italian
fancy
suits, vacation.
so gross, and I thought that as a result, the NRA was weakened. So why is it still so hard? Because it used to be the NRA obviously was so strong and people didn't wanted a good rating from the NRA if they had represented, if their constituents were conservative. So why hasn't this weakening and the fact that the majority of people in it want sensible gun laws, why haven't we been what's keeping us from doing it?
So our theory of change when I started Moms Demand Action was sunlight is the best disinfectant. And we are going to shine a light on the NRA, which was at the time the most powerful, wealthy special interest that's ever existed in this country, right? The National Rifle Association, which is really just an outgrowth of the gun industry, their lobbying front. And that's what we did. We shared all of their ridiculous policy proposals. We even sued them. I mean, we did everything you possibly could do to show the American public what was happening, and it worked. We moved the needle. They became despised as an organization, and eventually they became subjects of investigations because of their corruption, spending money on personal vacations, Italian suits. I mean, membership dollars were going into their pockets instead of into their programs. And so that was very successful. In fact, Wayne LaPierre had to resign in disgrace. The company is hemorrhaging political and power and finances. However, what our theory of change did not allow for was that guns would become an organizing principle on the far right. Every single state has its own version of the NRA that is to the right of the NRA. They believe any gun law whatsoever is an infringement on the Second Amendment. So, for example, if you live in Colorado, those are the Rocky Mountain gun owners, and they fight tooth and nail against any common sense gun laws. And there are these other big organizations at a national level that have sprung up, to fill the vacuum that the NRA ended up leaving, also to the right of the NRA. So these forces still have to be combated, and they can be pushed back. Unfortunately, we have an administration right now that's embracing them.
It's really become a proxy for a whole laundry list of
Yeah.
right-wing extremism, and I think it's
Yes.
sort of the cornerstone. And I wanted to basically, I think I can do this, you guys. Again, please forgive me, I'm new to Substack, but I mentioned the Eric Swalwell, right? It's a
Yes.
hard name, by the way.
Yes.
The thing that he, posted, oh, I don't know if I can do this if it's not on my thing. Sorry, I can't
Yeah,
do
yeah.
it because
It was very scary.
it was very scary. And tell everyone about, I mean, I think a lot of people are thinking about this because threats to political leaders and also leaders like you, Shannon, have really increased. And as a result, that people are having to hire security. I interviewed Jasmine Crockett
Yep.
yesterday for my podcast, and she was talking about how wealthy people can afford security or if you're in a leadership position, but for everyone else who's a member of Congress, they can't. So, can you talk about sort of the fear among political folks or people who even are running for office in terms of the increase uptick in violence?
Yeah, I feel like Moms Demand Action volunteers have been sounding the alarm on this for over a decade. When we started our organization, we would show up at marches or rallies. We would always be circled by mostly men with guns, sometimes semi-automatic rifles. You may remember the story that made worldwide news when 4 Moms Demand Action volunteers went to lunch in a restaurant in Texas, and they looked out the window and all these men started pulling long guns out of the back of a truck and posing with them in front of the restaurant. And they had to wait for hours until they went away. It was perfectly legal for them to do that. I mean, this is, Ruth Ben-Ghiat, who is a historian, talks about how these small armed militias are always a warning signal for an autocracy to come. And we've been saying that for years. I started immediately receiving threats of death and sexual violence to me and to my family members. And, I tell the story in my new book, which is I called the local police where I lived in Indiana. I asked them to come over so I could tell them what's going on to keep an eye on my house. And the officer looked at me and after I explained what I had done with Moms Demand Action, he said, "Well, that's what you get when you mess with the Second Amendment, ma'am." And I really knew in that moment that I could either back down or double down. And, if I lose my children, I have nothing left to lose. And I think so many volunteers like me had that in mind, which is they're trying to silence and intimidate us. They're trying to use the Second Amendment to take away our First Amendment rights. And I understand people's fear. I mean, particularly in the wake of the assassination of a state lawmaker in Minnesota. And I don't know if you saw the news coverage, but apparently Republican got together and caucused in Congress after that and said, "We need you to hire security for our homes." And yet these are the same lawmakers who could act to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people don't, right? It's gun safety for me, but not for thee. And we see this over and over again in this country.
I found this actually, Alyssa, who works with me, found this, and I just want to play this for everyone. You stupid little cops don't have the intelligence to go up against, and you just prove it. No good. So then you don't get by fucking asshole. Illegal aliens need your work. God, you love them so much. You used to feel the type of blame.
It's so
I think we
disgusting.
heard enough, but This is an example. This is Eric Swalwell, a congressman who posted it to kind of but Shannon, when I heard that, of course, it's so upsetting and appalling, but it reminded me of the kinds of messages you were left and the kind of communication you got on really a regular basis and how
Yes.
terrifying that is.
Katie, can you give people the name of your documentary again? Because, if anyone wants a primer on the history of guns in this country and how we got to where we are, it is such a good thing to watch. And as you mentioned, I am in that video and are in that movie documentary, and you show me listening to the calls that I got constantly every single day, threatening my life.
Yes, it's called Under the Gun. I mean, it has a kind of a strange backstory. I was personally sued for $12 million
Yes.
by some of the people. Luckily, the lawsuit was dismissed, but it was very upsetting. And it's a long story, everyone. But it was a group of gun owners in Virginia, and they were much more conservative than the NRA. Kind of one of those groups that you were
Yep.
describing. And the editor and the director of the film put some music after I asked them a question. And what they did was not journalistically sound, by the way. But as a result, a lot of people didn't see the movie because of the litigation. And I'm going to see if maybe I can post it on my YouTube channel,
Oh, that would be amazing.
or put a link on Substack, because it is such a helpful, it really is a helpful primer, as you said, about how our gun culture has evolved. And the NRA was originally set up to be kind of a gun safety
Yep.
organization.
Training.
For yes, for hunters, and then sort of how the gun culture grew in this country. And I remember I was really shocked by the statistics that there are more gun shops in the US than Starbucks and McDonald's combined, which is crazy. And I think it really is a very helpful doc. And I think it also shows mom's demand in action in a really, I think, powerful way. Anyway, well, I could talk to you forever, Shannon, but I want to talk to you about your book because, again, what I said at the beginning of our conversation for people who maybe hadn't joined yet is that the world feels like it's on fire. The country feels like a very scary place. Democracy, in my view, is really at risk, and the kind of government overreach we're witnessing is, frankly, I think, terrifying. And so the most often asked question I get is, what can I do? What
Mm.
can we do? Please tell us. Somebody said they were tired of me talking about the problems. They wanted me to tell them how to fix them. And I'm like, I'm just one person. I'm not sure how to fix them. I'm not sure what to do. Um, but this book really does kind of outline how you can take something you care about and turn it into a movement or turn it into a focal point to actually get things done. So can you talk about sort of the advice you're giving? And I know you spoke to a lot of people who have kind of started things themselves. You should have talked to us about Stand Up to Cancer, Shannon.
You're right, and we'll have to do a whole conversation about that because I think it's a perfect example of what I talk about in the book. So, this book is the theme of fire, right? And living on fire, which is just a metaphor for two things: figuring out what's limiting you and figuring out what's calling you. That could be personal, it could be political, it could be professional. As you said, we are at a point in this country and in the world where we all need to figure out the fire formula. This is something I figured out at age 41. I've helped thousands of other women figure it out through my career and my activism. And it's really identifying your abilities, your values, and your desires. And then practicing bringing them together over and over again. Because when you do, and Katie, maybe you felt like this with Stand Up to Cancer, it's like alchemy. It's like touching the divine. It is finally figuring out what brings you fulfillment, and it helps you find your people. When I started Moms Demand Action, I was not the person anyone would have pointed at and said, oh, she should lead the largest group to take on the special interest. I had little to no knowledge about the legislative process, gun violence, or organizing. I had severe untreated ADHD and a debilitating fear of public speaking.
I can't believe that.
Horrific, like, to the point where I once quit a job because they told me I was gonna have to go speak to a crowd. So if you told me Moms Demand Action involved public speaking, I would have said, "Oh, I will not be starting that Facebook page." But I grew into it, and I started to understand that people wanted to hear what I had to say, and I got over that. But my point being, we all have a unique set of values, abilities, and desires. All of us. And I saw it over and over again. Maybe a Moms Demand Action volunteer would come into the organization. She was an accountant, and she was devastated because her kid went through a lockdown drill, and suddenly she's a volunteer. But guess what? When you are surrounded by people who support you, when you are in community and they help you see that you have all these other skills, suddenly you want to do more courageous things. Maybe you want to run for office. Maybe you want to ask for a promotion. Maybe you want to get out of a relationship that isn't serving you. We talk about all these things in the book. I interview over 70 other women. And it's just fascinating to me how people become, at any age, including 70s, 80s, and beyond, fire starters, right? People who decide to prioritize their desires over their obligations. Because I think women are often taught that.
Yes, and often taught to take a back seat, and I also think as women get older, they are taught that their voices matter less and less, and I think that's absolute bullshit, and it's just not true, and I don't care if you're 90 or 19, there are ways that you can contribute and change the world. I'm curious if there are examples, maybe a couple of the examples that really moved you that you can tell us about that might, and then you can maybe tell everyone watching how to kind of zero in on their passion points.
Yes, and there's tons of journal prompts and exercises in the book, but when you look at your values, that's your North Star. They're going to change throughout your life. Mine were much different at 2012. People are asked, "Thank you, Katie."
Fired Up
The
is
book
the
is
book
called
title,
Fired Up.
Linda. By the way, I'm still trying to understand, like, could men benefit from oh, I
Yes,
'cause I love when people ask questions. I'm gonna ask that later, but let Shannon answer that, and then I wanna be responsive to
sure,
people's questions because that's kind of what I think is so unique about Substack.
totally.
It's a community, and I really wanna be a conduit for people who are following you and
Yeah,
following
yeah,
me. But go ahead, and then I'll start to, answer some
sure.
questions.
So
Okay.
defining your values, they change throughout your life. They're really the North Star. Your abilities. I love these exercises because, women in particular are sort of taught to downplay what are so-called soft skills when are actually incredibly value and important skills. So we have you list out everything you've ever done successfully. So you have that list to remind you, but also to ask other people what they see as your abilities. That's a really important exercise because they see things in you that you might not see in
Yeah, and
yourself.
sometimes people are too modest, right? And sometimes
Yes,
they think, "Oh, well, I just stayed home and raised a family." Well, they're like a CEO, and they've had to really learn how to be great
absolutely.
organizers and experts in time management and all this stuff, right?
Yes, those are the skills that I brought to Moms Demand Action, right? It's storytelling. And then the final piece is your desire. What are your desires? What are your dormant desires? I feel, in keeping with the fire metaphor, every woman deserves to get to the end of their life and know they burned. All people do. And so when you think about what is your legacy, which is sort of a big loaded word, like your name on the side of a building or a philanthropy, it isn't that. It's just that you lived authentically. And Katie, can you guess when I interviewed these women, many of them moms, what most of them said they were worried their deathbed regret would be?
No, I don't know.
That they somehow were bad parents because they focused too much on what they wanted or pursued their desires. And I think, it's that guilt and shame that is kind of built into us sometimes that makes us feel like we have to just fulfill our obligations and not our desires. I'm on the other side of that chasm. I have adult children. They're so proud of me. They're thrilled. They don't remember the one soccer game I didn't go to in 2006. They remember seeing me figure out what lit me up and doing it.
And by the way, I think that's sort of also illustrative of the trend in the last couple of decades, really, of overparenting, of doing
Yes.
too much for your kids, about being there. And then you focus so much time and attention on your children. You are either helicopter parents or now what they call snowplow parents. where you just get rid of any trouble in their path and solve everything for them. And I don't think it serves the kids well. Not that I'm an expert on this either, but I just don't really have the guilt gene. My daughters probably are like, yeah, but I don't know why. I always felt, well, first of all, I was a single mom, so I needed to earn a living and support my kids. But also, like, who says that when you have kids, you've got to give up yourself?
That's a
I
lot of
just have
pressure
never
on
ascribed to
kids.
that.
Yes.
Anyway, so that's interesting because that would not be my biggest fear on my deathbed.
What is your like, what would yours be?
What would my fear be on my deathbed? That I didn't do enough, that I didn't
Mm,
do enough to make the world a better place, that,
mm.
that I don't know, or that I was too, too kind of fragmented and all over the place to really make a difference in cancer research,
Uh,
for example. But
I would say the opposite is true. I mean, what you're talking about, I talk about in the book what are false fires, right? We're all told there's one single purpose for us, which I don't buy into. I think life is about a bunch of different fires and finding fulfillment and letting them go when you're done with them. And I think you have done that so beautifully. I mean, your career in communications and your work on cancer and your activism, you are the perfect example of that.
okay, well, good. Then you made me feel less bad about myself. So I'll think of another deathbed regret and get
Okay.
back to you because
Thank
I'm
you.
sure I'll have plenty of them. Can you give me a couple of examples of women? Because as you said, you
Yeah.
talked to about 70 people who might inspire us to kind of say, okay, this is what I needed to really get started,
Yes.
to
I
light
mean,
my fire.
yes. I mean, and they're women at all ages of their life. You know, I talk to women who have just graduated from college and felt like they were on the wrong path. It's interesting. I talk to a lot of women who are immigrants or the parents of immigrants, and there's this idea you have to be a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, and they set out on that path. And they ended up, wanting to do something different. I think that's one archetype for my book, which is Fired Up: How to Turn Your Spark into a Flame and Come Alive at Any Age. I think the other archetype are women with young kids who feel like they're overwhelmed and don't have the ability to make a difference. I think another is are empty nesters like me. You know, I've been an empty nester now for a few years, and I'm finally at the age where I feel like I have the time and the space to figure it out. And then, I would say also women and people who are retirees. Some of the most productive volunteers at Moms in Action were women who were in their 70s and beyond. And I tell so many stories in the book. I'll tell you two really quick ones. One, Amber Goodwin applied to law school, about 8 or 9 law schools, and was rejected right out of college. When Donald Trump was elected in 2016, she decided to try again. She was 40 years old. She finally got in. She became the first Black president of her law school. And now her fire is helping other people, women of color, get into law school all across the country.
Wow.
Um, but here's another great one. I interviewed a woman named Carol Frick who always wanted to be a writer, but she got a job as a phys ed teacher, paid the bills. She loved her career, but after 30 years, she retired. She was volunteering in an animal shelter. She decided to write a book about a couple that fell in love at an animal shelter. She went home and taught herself how to write a book, how to write dialogue, how to create chapters. I mean, it's complicated, right? If you've never
Right.
done it. She sent that book, once she wrote it, out to 218 publishers, was rejected 218 times. Finally, on the 219th time, she got a book deal and became a published author in her 70s.
That's
You are
awesome.
never too old. It is never too late to find your fire.
Absolutely. Well, I would love to, if there's some questions from everyone who's watching. First of all, hi, everyone. I'm new to Substack, so thanks for being a part of this. Linda Ferguson, I like Linda. She's she writes a lot of comments. So I'm going to say, Katie, you're an inspiration to me as a cancer widow. My husband died almost 4 years ago, and I had to reinvent myself several times. I mean,
Mm,
sometimes the fire finds you because I got very interested in cancer research and advocacy after Jay died. I'd never really known anyone who had had cancer because he was just 41. And then my sister died of pancreatic cancer. And so I think sometimes your life circumstances are the things
yes.
that ignite a real cause and a passion within you. So sometimes I think, and I also, for me, really setting off on this journey, Shannon, was so healing and cathartic for me because, again, I felt so powerless when Jay was sick. And then to be able to channel my energies into something that would keep people from getting cancer, for example,
Yes.
doing the colonoscopy or raising money for cancer research, um, in really because of Jay and in a way to honor him, it was so cathartic and helpful for me. So I think sometimes people can find their fire when something bad happens or they experience either loss or an obstacle, right? And they
Yep.
say, how can we make this better?
I interview one woman in the book whose daughter died of an overdose. And, this woman had a really fulfilling career. She was on this very specific trajectory. And when that happened, she decided that she was going to create an organization to educate people about how to prevent your kids from, getting involved in drugs or potentially overdosing. And it completely changed her life. She's in charge of this foundation now. She said it helped her find her people to heal after this horrific tragedy in her life. So I do think that's true. I mean, it can be something that you were called to because of an experience that you've had. But, I was not a gun violence survivor. I was
Right.
just an angry American. So I also think, and I talk about in this book to help you figure out what it is you want to do, what insults your soul? Or
Yeah,
what is calling you? There are different ways to look at that, and certainly that is one of them.
that's great. And I love this passage in your book. During the first half of women's lives, we're often so focused on building our lives with a focus on helping and supporting others that we forget our time is finite. But when we reach midlife, we finally have the wisdom to see that we hold the power to burn it all down and build new lives focused on what we want. If you take one thing from this book, let it be this: you are allowed, even obligated, to decide how to live your life, and it is never too late decide to live your life on fire. Um, so I hope that everyone is listening to that and thinking about that and thinking about ways they can channel their incredible energy and intelligence and commitment to something that is bigger than themselves, because I think the returns are so uh, gratifying, and I think it can be so helpful. Before we go, by the way, hi everyone, it's me again. I don't
It's just like Instagram. You do it all the
I
time.
I know, but I don't know. I just feel like this community is different. First of all, I don't get a lot of weirdos. Thank you on Substack.
Yay, no weirdos.
I get a lot of like mean, crazy people on Instagram. And then I have to turn the comments off because they're like insulting me. And I'm like, do I really have to read this? But if you guys have any questions, how do I do the questions? My team
I
has
think they
to,
just spin by.
yeah, you're doing awesome, Katie.
But Katie, let
Oh,
me really quickly mention, you talked about community earlier. So when people buy the book, that this lasts for one more week, they can get enrolled in Firestarter University, and over 500 people have already enrolled in Firestarter University. So I don't think you can live on fire without a community. And if you join and you register your book at fired-up-book.com, you can become part of Firestarter University, which starts in September. It's online, it's year long, and it's free this week. The other thing I would
uh-oh.
that is so fascinating to me is that a bunch of women who started Moms Demand Action have helped me, have come to me and said, we want to create these bonfires. I talk about bonfires in the book. That's basically finding your group of people. They're creating them in real life now across the country. So it's kind of like Moms Demand Action chapters, but just focused on personal, professional, and political growth. So that's really exciting to me that the book is great and helpful in a manual, but yet it's also turning into all these real life actions.
Well, I think it's awesome, and people are asking about where they buy the book. You buy it, kids, wherever you buy books. You can get it, I'm sure, on Amazon. If you're not really into Amazon, you can go to a local bookstore,
Yeah.
which is really great. And Shannon's book is called Fired Up: How to Turn Your Spark into a Flame and Come Alive at Any Age. Shannon, I'm so in awe of you. And, I know you didn't like public speaking. You've obviously blossomed into an incredible public speaker and an activist and advocate. And I've asked you this before, I think every time I ask you, but really, seriously, you're the kind of person we need to run for office. And why won't you, Missy?
You've never framed it that way, so negatively. That's like a dare.
It is.
I might.
I wish you would, because I think we really need people like you who I think represent our values. And yeah, I'm firing you up, someone said,
You are.
and can go into Congress. I also think you have such a nice way about you. You can reach across the aisle, and I think it's just time. And I don't know what you're waiting for. Okay, I like this whole thing. I like Fired Up University and all that. I think it's awesome. I'm a big fan of everything you do, but seriously, I'm too old to run for office. I'm sorry, you guys.
It's not true,
Well,
but
anyway, I
I
would
just
like
moved
you.
to Florida, and so
I
that might be
know.
the perfect place to actually run.
Seriously, do you think
Yes.
Florida? I worry about the state of Florida. What has it been like for you? Because they're
It's actually the people have been lovely. I live in an area that is, I would call purple. And I think there's a real opportunity to make change in the state house or in Congress there. And I'm very excited about supporting David Jolly, who is running for governor, a former Republican who's running as a Democrat. And I really think that, as I've seen for 12 years, politics is cyclical and it will change back. Florida has been less red than it is now. And so I am very hopeful, and I actually think Florida could be the right place to do
so.
something like that.
So what would you do? Like, what would be the first step now that I'm your campaign manager, Shannon? What would be your first step, your first foray into, I don't want to say public service because you've been in public service for many years
Yeah.
now, but what would be your first step to get involved in state politics?
Yeah, and so, for those of you who know Annie Andrews, she's in my book. She's such a great story about someone who moved from being a Moms Demand Action leader into running for office. She's actually running against Lindsey Graham right now. We're gonna
I
do
am
an
going to
event together.
interview her. I am so
Good.
excited to
She's a
meet her.
very close friend.
Okay, Shannon, she and I have been DMing. I've been in touch with her team. I'm so excited. She's a doctor,
Yep, she's
right?
a pediatrician.
A pediatrician. She, again, is just the kind of person we need to run for office too.
Yes, and we're doing an event together in Charleston around my book because she is in the book and she's an example of someone who used her fire personally, made a lot of changes, professionally made a lot of changes, I'm sure she'll talk to you about, and politically, right? She never saw herself running for office, and she said Moms Demand Action gave her the courage and the support system to find her fire and to do this work. And so I think she's, again, firedupbook.com. You can become an Annie. You can become a fire starter by going, reading the book and going to Firestarter University. But Annie is a great example of this. And in terms of my first step,
I was going to say you're
I'm
deflecting. You
not
didn't really answer my
deflecting.
question.
I'm not deflecting. I think my first step is to get the lay of the land in Florida and to start to think about where I can be of best use. I don't think it's always Congress. I think a lot of times it can even be in the state house. So I need to think about that. And I promise you will be the first person I text when I make a decision.
By the way, I'm actually going to go a step further. I think you need to announce that you're running for office with me on
I will.
Substack.
Done and done. Not today, but when I decide that, you will be with you.
Okay, that would be great. And obviously, you have a lot of fans who are watching this, Shannon, including me as your number one fan. Thank you for writing this book. Thank you for giving us a template about how we can really try to leave the world better off than we found it. How we can, I like the whole idea of planting a tree and providing shade for future generations. Now I'm a grandmother, so I worry
Yeah,
about my grandson, who's so cute, everybody. He's so cute. He's 14 months. His name is Jay, after my late husband and Ellie's dad, which was really incredibly meaningful.
beautiful.
But anyway, I'm just really always happy to see you, Shannon. You know that. And the book is fired up, you guys. Let's sell some books for Shannon. And I think you have your whole campaign team watching right now, Shannon.
Excellent. Then, again, you'll be the first person I tell, and I do always appreciate your support. You are a fire starter, and I just urge everyone to go to firedupbook.com. Let's build this community together. It'll be a community that helps me run. I'll be the community that helps you figure out what you desire and go after that too.
And also, can I make a plug, you guys? This is so obnoxious, but I'm competitive and I like to get followers on Substack. Most importantly, I like to get followers because I have a team of incredible reporters and producers who we've assembled at our media company. And they're the reason I'm able to do things like with Shannon, my producer, Julia Lewis. Hi, Julia. She organized this whole interview. I've read some of your book. I haven't read the whole thing. Julia has. But, we need followers and even paid support if you guys are willing to do that to keep everybody on our team gainfully employed. So if you'd follow me on Substack and consider being even a paid subscriber, I guess. I mean, that's sort of tacky, isn't it? But it all goes to my team
Katie,
and
I write
helps.
about this in the book. It's called The Passion Tax. I worked for 11 years with no income as a volunteer. You deserve to get paid. Your team deserves to get paid. Women deserve to get paid.
Yeah, especially if people feel like we're offering, service to people.
Yeah,
And I've always, believe it or not, seen journalism as a public service
totally.
because
Yes. It's a novel idea.
without an informed citizenry, you cannot have a democracy, as the founder of my alma mater, UVA, said, old Thomas Jefferson. Yes, he was a flawed man, but he was also very smart. Okay, on that note, Shannon, so good to see you. Good luck with the book tour.
Thank you.
Tell Annie I'm super, super stoked to talk to her too.
I will. I will. I'm sure she'll see this.
Okay, thanks everyone. This has been so fun.
Thank you.
Okay, see you soon. Bye.
Bye.